Hi there everybody, Daniel Siletti here once again, and this is What's Going On. And once again, I'm Daniel Siletti, and I'm joined here with a real spaceman, Dr. J. Buckley. So thank you so much for joining us.
Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So you're an astronaut. How cool is that? But you just did a presentation here, and you were a doctor. So was that always what you wanted to do, or did you just want to jump into space immediately?
So my undergraduate training was in electrical engineering, and then I went to medical school, and I was working in my medical training and realized that I had always wanted to be involved in the space program, and that's when I said, well, if I really am that interested, I ought to look into it some more, and so I started looking around for places that were doing research on the biomedical part of spaceflight, and that's how I got involved in space physiology and how the body adapts to weightlessness. And then at that time, they had a program called the Payload Specialist Program where people who were scientists from outside of NASA could come and be crew members on particular flights. And so then I was accepted into the Payload Specialist Program and flew an Aerolab mission.
That's great. And I took some shots from your speech that you did, so we can take a look at that real quick.
We have a problem, and that is we have our brain is above our heart, so our heart and our blood vessels have to work to keep blood flowing to our head. You may have had the experience, have you ever had the experience where you stood up too fast and you felt lightheaded? Well, that's because you have a system that works to keep blood flowing to your head, even when you're standing up, and it works against gravity to keep blood flowing to your head. And sometimes when you get a little bit ahead of that system, you can start to feel lightheaded. But if that system weren't there, you could have some problems. If you didn't have that system, what would happen every time you got out of bed in the morning? You'd pass out, right? Every time you'd stand up, you would pass out. So we have a pretty well-developed system to work against gravity and keep blood flowing to our head. But that system changes when you're in space. So some of the experiments that we did had to do with how the system that maintains blood to our head changes when you're weightless. And you'll see some of the experiments that we did about that on the video. Another area we were really interested in on the mission had to do with balance. And when I came back from being on the mission, I kind of walked like this with my feet far apart. I felt a little bit unsteady. I went around corners real slowly because I was walking like somebody who had had too much to drink. I had a little bit of a balance problem. Because the thing was, I was back on Earth with a balance system that was adapted to weightlessness. So while I was in space, my balance system was changing. I didn't really notice that. But once I came back to Earth, I was walking like somebody who had a balance problem. So one of the things we wanted to understand was how does the balance system change when you're in weightlessness? Well, where is the balance organ? Yeah, right in here. It's in the densest bone in the body, right? So it's not really accessible. So how are you going to study that balance system when you're in space? Well, let me give you, if you ever, what if you took a video of yourself running down a football field looking at the goalpost and then showed it to everybody? What would it look like? Everything would be bouncing all over the place, right? How come you can run down the football field, look at the goalpost, and stay nice and steady? And I give you an example of that. I want you to put your hand out in front of you like this, 2 fingers, and then move it back and forth. Can you keep it in focus? I have a little bit of trouble. All right, now keep it straight, and now move your head back and forth. No problem, right? Keeping those fingers nice and easily focused. That's because there are only 3 connections that need to be made between your balance organ and your eyes to keep those fingers in focus. So there's a close connection between the balance organ, which is in this dense bone, and your eyes. What means that if we could look at eye movements, we might be able to get a sense about how the balance system is changing. And that's what this rotating chair is about. You'll see this on the video. When you're riding in that rotating chair, there's a camera that's looking at your eye movements, and those eye movements tell you how the balance system is changing. This is Dave Williams, who's from Canada. He's a neuroscientist and also an emergency room physician. Here I am, and I hope you can see I'm wearing my green Dartmouth name tag to show a little bit of Dartmouth pride there. And this is Jim Pawelczyk, who was a payload specialist like I was, who was from Penn State. Launch morning, we're going to head out to the shuttle that's ready to go. We're wearing these orange launch entry suits, which has a pressure suit in it. It's got a G suit, it's an exposure garment. When the whole thing together, plus the parachute and everything, weighs about 75 pounds. About 2 minutes before launch, we're going to close and lock the visors. And then at about 6 seconds before launch, the main engines start. And this is really a slowed down look of the main engines getting started. And then when it counts down to 0 is when the solid rocket boosters go. And you can see the shaking inside there. And once the solid rocket boosters light, you know you're going somewhere for 2 minutes. Because once they get started, they're not going to shut off. So the shuttle generated about 7 million pounds of thrust. You're going faster than 100 miles an hour by the time you clear the tower, and faster than the speed of sound in 55 seconds. You probably noticed the shuttle turned a little bit. It's heading out towards the east. And right now we've got the main engines and the solid rocket boosters firing. But after 2 minutes, we're going to push the solid rocket boosters away. So you're going to see a flash when the solid rocket boosters are pushed away. And we'll also see a little slowed down. There's the flash. That's what the flash looks like inside the flight deck. And then this is a really slowed down view of the solid rocket boosters falling away. And the solid rocket boosters had parachutes in the top, so they would fall down, the parachute would deploy, or fall into the ocean, and then be recycled and used again. So right now we're just on the main engines. And now I want you to watch this seat down at the bottom here, because we're going to go from weighing 3 times our normal weight to now we're weightless. The main engines just shut off, and now we're in orbit around the Earth and we're weightless. And the last thing that happens is that the external tank is pushed away. We had the liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen for the main engines, and you can see a little bit of that venting out there. And it's going to hit the atmosphere at about 100,000 feet, burn up, and fall into the Indian Ocean. It was the only part of the shuttle system that was not reused. These are the payload bay doors of the shuttle. We're going to open these up so we can stay on orbit. These are radiators and get rid of the heat from the equipment and from us. So it's very important that the doors be open. And then you can see the Space Lab module in the payload bay of the shuttle, silhouetted here against the Earth, which was stunningly beautiful.
Those were some great points that you talked about. You had the you talked about how you brought in the rats there and you experimented on them, and the turning chair. Now, were those some ideas that you came up with, or were they ideas that the other people who told you to go up into space came up with?
Yeah, so it turns out that this was back in the 1990s. Mm-hmm. The 1990s were the decade of the brain.
Okay.
And in order for NASA to celebrate the decade of the brain, they devoted a mission totally to the brain and nervous system. And then they asked people around the country and around the world to submit proposals about how they would use weightlessness to study the brain and nervous system. And then those went through a review. It was called a peer review process, where people, critiqued and then selected the best ones. And then those best ones became the Neurolab mission.
That's great. And so your shuttle was Columbia.
Correct.
And you said this was in the 1990s. So what other shuttles came before that? Was Columbia, was this the first Columbia, or were there other Columbias before that?
So the space shuttle, there were the shuttles were, you know, there was Columbia, Challenger, Atlantis, Discovery, and Endeavour. And initially there were 4 shuttles. Columbia was the first to fly. So the Columbia first flew in 1981.
Okay.
Our mission in 1998 was the 25th flight of Columbia. And then Columbia flew a few more times after that, and then it was destroyed in re-entry back in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Then Challenger, you know, was destroyed back in 1986.
Yes.
But it was Endeavour that then was built to replace it.
Okay. And you know, this is nothing against Columbia, but I mean, the one thing that I always find people is that, you know, I say name the shuttles for me, and they always forget Enterprise was that first shuttle there.
Yes.
And I'm a big Star Trek fan, so I always remember Enterprise there. And I was watching your flight there, your liftoff, and it's amazing the power of that engine there. And you know, one of the credits of a Star Trek series shows those rocket engines lifting off. And you know, how does that feel? Because it must feel like, you know, you're getting boosted with the amount of power.
Yeah, so it is a lot of power. It's 7 million pounds worth of thrust. And at first, when the main engines start, they start about 6 seconds before liftoff, and so you can hear the snarl of the pumps, and then you know, the whole shuttle tilts forward a little bit, and then when it tilts back is when the solid rocket boosters light, and then there's a lot of shaking and motion as you head over into the launch. It lasts about 8.5 minutes.
Wow.
And the solid rocket boosters only burn for the first 2.
We took a look at your fellow crewmate who went up with you in the shuttle, and he was saying that, you know, when he came back, one of the first things that he did was had a pizza. Mm-hmm. And so, what was your first thing? And do you keep in contact with the rest of the crew?
We do keep in contact. Right now is our 20th anniversary of our flight.
Yes, that's incredible.
So we've been exchanging emails about that.
That's great.
And then the one thing that I had that was special after I came back was bacon wrapped shrimp.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now that sounds good, actually.
And it was good.
All right. Well, you know, I want to thank you for joining us.
Sure.
This was great.
And
you know, having some clips from your talk was great. But you know, I always like to end my show. I'm a big movie guy, but I'm not a big political guy. And there's a columnist out there who he has this segment called "I Hate These People," but I like to turn it around, and so my end segment is called "I Kind of Like These People," and it's kind of space themed, and you know, there are a lot of space and science fiction movies out there, and a lot of them. One that comes to mind is Space Camp, and it was done in the 80s, I believe, and it had, you know, like kids go to space camp and something goes wrong. But the one film that I always say gets a little bit made fun of is Moonraker, the James Bond film.
Oh gosh, it's been a while since I've seen that. Yeah.
But the one thing I liked about it, and this is why I like it, they actually used shuttles in that movie.
They did. That's right.
And so, you know, my question to you is why don't more movies use actual Earth-made ships, and they always come up with these futuristic designs like the Enterprise or the Millennium Falcon or something like that?
Oh, well, that's a great question. Well, I don't know. I guess probably because, you know, it's speculative fiction. You know,
right?
It's like, what could be?
Right.
You know? And that's what makes it interesting. Is trying to project out into the future. What would a spacecraft that would go between different planets look like?
Exactly.
So, whereas the things that people know are things in the now.
Right.
So it doesn't seem as quite as speculative or as exciting. I'm guessing that's part of it.
Yeah, that's actually a great point on it. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
And it's been a pleasure to meet you.
Good to meet you.
And I've said in my other interviews that here in Concord, actually, William Shatner is going to be here. So Shatner, I'm coming for you. Be on my interview show, buddy. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
My name's Daniel Siletti.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right.